My name is Gavin Mount. I'm from the School of Humanities and Social Sciences, and I'll be talking to you about developing a literature review. In most of the literature on literature reviews, you'll see quotes such as Chris Hart's observation here that a literature review is integral to the success of academic research, and we'll also be talking about how it's an indispensable component of doctoral thesis. Uh, in the immediate to short term, you'll be needing it for your confirmation. It will almost certainly shape the content of your early chapters. Versions of your literature review will find their way into proposals such as research grants or book proposals, and as you produce material of an academic kind, you will find that very many of your first part of your arguments will constitute a literature review. So it's a very useful and enduring and reusable element and skill. I like to highlight when talking about literature reviews that this is actually probably one of the most important opportunities for you to firmly establish your credentials as a scholar, but also to fulfill your expectations of producing a doctorate of philosophy. And the two elements that we might highlight here are that it is a significant and original contribution to knowledge. The strength of your literature review will also be very important in terms of demonstrating that you are engaging in a critical analysis, and the clarity that you establish in these early part of your argument will demonstrate your ability for effective communication, and also establish yourself as someone who has mastery of your discipline and demonstrates expert knowledge. Chris Hart, who I'll be referring to a few times in this presentation, has defined a literature review expansively in this case. And this is a broad definition of what a literature review might entail. It's quite ambitious in the sense that it looks at all of the documents, both published and unpublished, on a topic. Now, the only way you can really achieve that in the end is by narrowing your focus. But to begin with, you ought to dive in and try to familiarize yourself with as much of the material relevant and pertaining to your research as possible. You then do have to refine down, and the actual literature review will only highlight perhaps a fraction of all the things that you do actually read and cover. But you need to demonstrate that you're across your field in this presentation, and then you also have to understand and extract out those elements that you believe are seminal, or those elements that you believe will highlight the thematic elements that you want to emphasize. And that is a very important element of doing a literature review at this level. You may have done literature reviews in the past at the undergraduate level, and these are more descriptive, topic focused. Some, or Hart at least, suggests that masters and other mid-level research projects may be more focused on looking at the analysing and summarising the literature, particularly highlighting the methodological issues and establishing an argument for the best approach to deal with the problem. At a PhD, the best literature reviews provide an analytical synthesis, and by that we mean there is a sense in which you have understood the literature and then perhaps reorganized it around important themes. It may be schools of thought that are well established in the field, but we're also looking for you, and this is very important, in reviewing that material, to identify a gap. There ought to be some gap in the field that requires filling, and that really sets up the whole purpose of your thesis. So how do we establish the criteria that ought to be assessed at all levels, at all stages of your doctoral candidature of the literature review? Well, we ought to be demonstrating that we have specialization, competency and an understanding and specialization in our area of scholarship. We need to demonstrate that the thesis will be making a contribution, a new contribution to an area of knowledge, and this is very important, particularly all throughout the thesis, the candidature, but at the confirmation stage you need to be making that case very clear. The level of scholarship needs to be clearly indicated at all phases as you progress through your PhD, and we want to see a strong indication of that by the quality of the sources that you're selecting and engaging with early on, and the quality of the research as right throughout the process up to when it's submitted. You need to also demonstrate originality. So let's look at some of these ideas in a little bit more depth. We assume at this level that your specialization in your field means that you understand the seminal works, the methodological debates, that you have the necessary intellectual background, and you stand with a degree of mastery of understanding of your discipline, and that you can manage and synthesize a large amount of material, and this is most clearly indicated in your literature review. But you should be careful in also how you specialize and select the important works that support your analysis. In terms of making a direct case for your contribution, one of the mistakes that people can make is that they omit elements or fail to mention elements in the literature, and then try to claim that that is new. But the experts who are reading their work will say, no, that's been done before. You need to go back and make the case that you are engaging in a new area. And this can be quite intimidating in terms of how it is that you make your case for creating a new contribution to knowledge. So don't assume that everything that you are thinking about is new. Sometimes an idea has been thought of many decades or even hundreds of years before in some form, but that can still be a new contribution by reviving and rethinking an earlier approach. So follow the leads and look at the way that scholars that you are reading and the influences on their work through their bibliographies and so forth. And one way to identify an area of need for a new contribution is to go to recent scholarship and read the conclusions where researchers are identifying areas that are in need of further development. That's quite a common element of a good conclusion in scholarly research, and it's also a good place to look for ways to extend contemporary debates and empirical questions. Hart suggests in his book on literature reviews that when an examiner is taking the literature review in account in reviewing an entire thesis, that they need to be reassured that the author understands the sum total of the knowledge of the topic and has then narrowed in and really addressed a really important question, and it's been resolved in some way, preferably with the support of some kind of primary research. So in the end, we want to demonstrate that what is established in the literature review is developed and followed through logically throughout the thesis, and those gaps that have been identified early in the thesis are in fact addressed, and there's an attempt has been made to fill the gap in the research. And finally, when we think about originality, again, this can seem daunting. Um, and here I have Phillips and Pugh, who have identified ways of carving out your argument for originality. And note that it needn't be all that dramatic. The idea of doing empirical work that has not been done before can be established in a number of ways. For example, if a study has been conducted extensively in one country or even two countries, but it hasn't yet been done and replicated in Australia, then it may well be a very good argument for reproducing a well-established methodology and approach, and making the empirical case of filling in that gap. So we can use already known ideas and practices and approaches and just add more empirical content to them, or we can make some contribution, conceptual contribution, by interpreting them in a different way. We can introduce new evidence that might challenge existing research in some way, or at least bring them into question. We can be original by organizing the material in a different way, creating a new synthesis, and organizing it in a way that hasn't been thought of before, and then demonstrating why that is a more effective way of doing that, and so on and so forth. So there's some nice steps here to look at how it is that you make your case for originality. But because it's one of the criteria, the core criteria, please do think carefully about how it is you make that case, as it is very important throughout the research, and it's probably one of the most important things you need to establish early on as you come into confirmation.